Hello. If we're not working in the same physical space as the rest of our team, how do we create and retain a sense of common purpose? What happens to all of that shared vision, that sense of commonality, when we can't actually share a common workspace or even be together in the same building? What do we do about that? Well, the answers are coming up in the second part of our in-depth conversation about virtualizing your practice. We'll be joined again by regular guest Steve Menges, product team member for assurance at CPA.com. Welcome to the Go Beyond Disruption podcast, where you'll get weekly insights on the technologies and the mindsets that power new opportunities within the global accounting and finance profession. From the UK hub of ARCPA and CIMA, I'm Kyle Hannon. This is part 2 of Virtualizing Your Practice, and I'm joined again by regular guest Steve Menges, who, as I said, is product team member for assurance at CPA.com. Now, a quick note, if this is the first time you're hearing this conversation with Steve, go back to episode 121 and listen to part 1 of this conversation. Then once you've done the listening to that, come right back here and listen to the rest of this one, which is what we are here for now. Steve, I wanted to pick on where we left off last time and focus on this question of people. I heard you mention something called cyber separation. This may sound silly, but I'm assuming this isn't something to do with breaking up with your other half over a video conferencing platform, is it?
Well, that's a great question, Kyle. Even before the recent global events, many growing firms were struggling with these types of things. They were struggling with staffing and corporate culture issues that they hadn't experienced before. And those struggles are magnified with remote working and with interviewing and onboarding for new staff now being via, Zoom meetings or telephone calls. One fact is that, the A&A, finance and other workforces themselves are changing. They're all changing overall as Generation Z enters the mix. And as technologists and data scientists and data analysts are inserted into CPA firms and finance companies to do the things like service organization or SOC, SOC audits, cybersecurity audits. And, you have new people brought on to work with artificial intelligence or AI, to work with blockchain, to work with bots and RPA and other technologies. So there really is a lot of change in the workforce within CPA firms and other organizations now. You've got new skill sets, often with a technical element to them that weren't necessarily coming in like that before. And then you've got this Generation Z is now coming in. They're now entering. And, I researched and wrote a piece not too long ago called 3 Staffing Insights for CPA Firms, Credit Unions, Banks, and More. And to do that, I found some pretty interesting things out that I'll share. I found out that there is a real generational element for all employers that you'll really need to embrace, or you'll get caught, you'll be caught unprepared for it. So here are 4 things for leaders to ponder. Okay, so Generation Z, which is folks born after 1996, right? Generation Z is here. All right, there's 61 million of them in the United States alone, and the first wave of Generation Z have already graduated from college. Okay, so Generation Z is entering the workforce. It's already happening. You may have already interviewed folks from this generation, but they're coming, and it's going to be a big wave, right? The second thing to think about is, millennials will comprise the majority of the workforce in 2025. All right, that's less than 5 years from now. So I know there's a lot of stereotypes and whatnot about millennials and, coming in and really kind of changing things and having very different attitudes. Well, in less than 5 years, millennials will comprise the majority of the workforce. So that's something to think about. Number 3, Generation X workers begin retirement in 2030. That is not that far away. So, these are generational shifts that are happening. and it's easy to sort of let them sort of fly by. But these are different groups. These are groups that think very differently than each other. They think very differently than baby boomers, and these are big shifts in the workforce. So let me give you one more. Here's what I would think is kind of a shocking finding from a new survey whose findings were recently published in the Harvard Business Review. So about half of millennials and 75% of Gen Zers have left a job because of mental health reasons. So ponder that for a moment. All right. Half of millennials and 75% of people that are members of Generation Z, they have left a job because of mental health reasons. I mean, that number shocked me. I really was surprised by that. So I think one thing that comes to mind with all of this, and this kind of comes hand in hand with this, is that, Gen Zers are digital natives, though, and millennials are nearly as comfortable with all things digital and virtual. So when you choose to virtualize your organization, your youngest and newest staff may be your best assets to implement the technology-related change and assist with your less tech-savvy staff. Getting newer and younger existing staff or anyone new to the organization engaged is incredibly important. It's never been more important than it is today. Another recent study that I was looking at says that 32% of United States workers feel that they are engaged in their job. They feel like engaged to the work that they're doing. That's less than a third. Okay, and then pair that with the statistic that says engaged employees, people that feel engaged with their job and their company, they are 59% less likely to seek out a new job in the next 12 months. Okay? So, all that said, the approach to staffing and training and development for most firms has to change accordingly. I really think that there's no option here. It's got to happen. These are big shifts, and all businesses, but we're talking about CPA firms and financial organizations. They have to change accordingly. There's no option there if you want to have a future.
Right, I get that. So change is one thing, but of course there's also continuity and there's contingency planning, and those are something else entirely, aren't they? And if we start with continuity, especially in the face of tremendous disruption, and the pandemic we're facing now is a really stark example of that kind of disruption, how do we balance what we need to be doing with what we need to stop doing? And once the pandemic is over, how much of that do we need to change? Or will we be doing things differently right into the mid or the long term?
We've talked about some of these things already a little bit. We talked about firms being ready for continuity and contingency and the new things that need to happen. But I think it is important when you asked about what do we need to stop doing. And there's one by the name of Lisa Bodell, who is the founder and CEO of a company called FutureThink. And she was the keynote speaker at the Digital CPA Conference in December in Bellevue, Washington. And I think she really nailed this, in my opinion. That's an excellent event, by the way. We'll probably next to AICPA Engage, the Digital CPA Conference, or DCPA. That's a CPA.com event. That's a great event that happens in December. But I went to the last one. I was a presenter, and I sat in on Lisa Bodell's presentation. And I'll give you a little taste of what she talked about. And what she talked about is that there's a formula to gaining a competitive advantage. To being successful, being as good as you can be, and gaining a competitive advantage over others. And it's quite simple. In concept, it's speed, agility, and focus. But as we know, complexity is holding most organizations back from creating a culture that embraces these three principles of success, speed, agility, and focus. Simplification is really the solution. It really can address so many of the problems. And simplification, a lot of that is about, things we no longer need to do, things that we should not still be doing, right? So every organization wants to know the techniques to help them eradicate complexity and get back to the meaningful work that drives that innovative change that we talked about. So what Lisa Bodell talks about, she goes on to state that, if your organization is mired in meetings and emails and reports, then that's what your culture will be known for. Wouldn't you rather be known as the company where people are engaged in truly meaningful work every day? That's the question she posed to the audience. And she's right. I think that's a pretty obvious answer. And leaders of firms and leaders of organizations, they just need a few tools. They need a little help in order to enact that simplification. So, they need some tools to help make that a reality. So now what I'll share now is one that I'll share now is to take a little time to understand which tasks take the most unnecessary time, both individually and as a team. Right, so it's thinking about in your company, in your organization, in your firm, take some time to really understand what are these tasks that take the most unnecessary time, right? And she talks about having an exercise to identify those unnecessary meetings and status reports, right? Identify them and then eliminate them and celebrate eliminating them. She does a great job about kind of talking about the joy it brought to this one organization when they had eliminated a meeting that had been running weekly for years. And there literally was a celebration at the firm because they no longer had that meeting that everybody kind of dreaded because they didn't believe that they were getting real value out of it. They didn't believe anybody was really getting value out of it. They were just sort of doing it because it was on the schedule on a recurring Wednesday with no end date put on there. Getting everybody actively involved in identifying areas for simplification within your organization and learning techniques to make simplification a habit. Right? These are things that you can do. These are things that staff, that leadership and staff can get excited about. Saying, hey, we want you to spend some time. Let's identify areas for simplification within your organization. And then let's look at how do we make this simplification exercise a habit? How do we look strategically at? You could even gamify it, but get rid of these tasks and reports and meetings that aren't adding value. Simplify to what really is needed. Start a culture of simplification and exemplify its practices. So think about that a little more. How much time do you spend doing email every day? Just think about that. How much time do you actually spend doing email? How valuable is that activity? Do you feel good after you've done 2 hours worth of email? Do you feel like, wow, that was great? Hey, are you multitasking during Zoom meetings to get caught up on the email? Are you on a Zoom meeting and you ask a question, or somebody asks a question of someone and they seem startled when they hear their name and there's a long silence, right? It's because people multitask during Zoom meetings. People multitask and do to try to get caught up on email. So they're doing one meeting, they're doing one activity that doesn't add value, and they're multitasking doing a second activity that really doesn't add value. That can't be good. So stop doing these many, many tasks that prevent you from having time to actually think. That is valuable time to get back and use that thinking time for ideas and innovation. So that's kind of my quick summary of Lisa Bodell's excellent keynote. But I'll tell you, her keynote deserves your attention, and you deserve your time back. So I've gotten her okay to share that with you, and that'll be part of the first link that we provide in the show notes is her just tremendous keynote about how to simplify to innovate and get your time back so that you can be doing things that are more valuable and fulfilling.
Yeah, we'll definitely put that in the show notes. People getting their time back is something that may have been almost impossible to consider up until a few months ago. And it's only now that we've got so much time in our hands because we're not commuting anymore during the lockdown that we're starting to kind of rethink things, aren't we? And of course, we know that things are going to get back to some form of new normality, but we are forced to see things in a different way. And sometimes that can be quite refreshing. Everyone is rejigging, reorganizing, reconfiguring the time they have. And we're doing that because now we know that it is possible. And we know that the future will make all sorts of other things possible too. Things that may have just been considered a luxury, for example, working from home all the time. That becomes something that's suddenly very doable for many of us. Of course, not for everyone, but it wasn't something that we could have even considered until now. And I think this makes us realize it puts all sorts of new possibilities ahead, but all sorts of new capabilities because of the technologies that we have in our hands right now, doesn't it? So let's talk about the capabilities we now have. Steve, is there an example you can share of a firm which has fairly recently undertaken this virtualization you're talking about, a case study of how that company may have transformed their technology, their outlook, their staffing structure, and so much else?
Yes, there is an example I'm really pleased to be able to share. So my colleague at CPA.com, Matt Towers, he spoke with the audit and assurance team at Anglin Reichmann Armstrong. Right now, they're a mid-sized CPA firm of about 100 people. They've got offices in 2 U.S. states in the Southeast. Plus, they now have a number of remote staff and consultant staff spread across a number of other states. Among other services and consulting offerings, they do preparations, compilations, reviews, and several different types of audits. That's a little background on them. This past fall, they met with Matt and he interviewed them and they told him about their plans to transform and virtualize, which included adopting a new cloud-based audit platform, which necessitated the audit practice, the entire audit practice, adopting new tools and aids for planning and risk assessment, for review, for team collaboration, and more. They talked to Matt about really a lot of the things that we're talking about. They talked about they needed to transform and virtualize their firm. So let's hear a little bit from them. So here's audit partner Jason Miller on their approach to new technology.
Our firm's been looking, like most of you, at the technological changes that are coming into the industry. And so we're trying to figure out what do we need to do as a growing firm to make sure that we're on the forefront of it. But, we're not too far out in front of it, nor do we want to be, behind.
Right. So they want to be at the forefront of new technology. This is something that they're passionate about. I mean, they don't want to be on the bleeding edge, but they definitely don't want to be behind, right? So they've made this decision. They really want to do that. Now, here's Jason on what he learned from a prior software implementation experience and their planning process this time around.
This will be the second large software move that I've made with the firm on audit software, and I've learned it's extremely important to get buy-in from the bottom up and get everybody involved in the decision-making process so everybody has a stake in the decision.
And again, let's hear from him on the role of his team in the selection process.
Being able to pull everybody from the group into this process as we're looking through it, we're at the exact same time. We've got licenses and are analyzing MindBridge, CCH's Teammate Analytics, PPC, Knowledge Coach, Power BI, Thomson Smart Risk Assessment and Fieldwork products, and again, the CPA OnPoint PCR. So I think that that's also created a lot of fun buzz within our department because it's got a lot of the group, excited about the change and some of the efficiencies that they can gain from it, but also the new audit tools that are coming out has also seemed to really pique their interest.
That's the head of audit at this mid-sized firm, and as he's talking about where they're selecting a new audit tool, a really important new audit tool. You probably recognize a lot of the names of the vendors that they're evaluating. And he's talking about his approach, that he's got the team involved in the selection process. The people that are going to ultimately use the tool, use this new virtual cloud-based tool, he's got them involved from the get-go. And I think as he talked about, he learned from the last time this happened that this was the approach he wanted to take now. So, one important discussion point in that discussion was how important it was to have a vision to guide everything. One that everyone could gravitate to, that made it clear to the team that it's not just disruption for the sake of disrupting. Those were the words that were used. They at Anglin, they also emphasized that a new mindset where everyone was starting to think about, what can we do to evolve, right? They're all thinking about, the whole team is thinking about, what can we do to evolve? They're thinking about ideas and the future, and they understand the larger vision of what they're trying to get to. Now, at the same time, as they're looking to evolve their audit technology, Anglin, very interestingly, chose to try to tackle a top issue impacting accounting firms today, that of finding and retaining qualified staff. Okay, this is an AICPA top firm issues survey, top 5 item. It's a top 5 issue across the board, meaning small firms, large firms, and everybody in between have this as an objective. All right, and it was, they have this as an objective, and they want to try to build a culture there that helps deliver a positive and lasting impression upon current, new, and potential staff members involved in attest services, in audit and assurance services. So, they're trying to do a couple pretty big things at the same time, but they felt that these things that they couldn't do one and then the other. They needed to address the virtualization element and the remote working, but also they need to address these staffing issues. They realize that finding and retaining staff is a big issue everywhere, and they can't ignore that until it becomes a critical problem for them. So, the virtualization and transformation effort for them was to include recruiting, right? Including a variety of experience levels, and keeping technology aptitude and comfort with new technology and comfort with frequent change in mind when they're doing recruiting, right? So this is an audit team that is thinking about recruiting and factoring those things in. They're also their efforts are including enabling staff to make an impact and encouraging staff to always be thinking of ways to further evolve through workflow and through technology. Having them, like we said earlier, thinking about evolution. That's part of their plan, what they're trying to do, what they told us back in the fall when we spoke with them. They want to have as part of their plan really promoting work-life balance and using a mentoring program to help get employees to connect with their strengths and passions and to speak up about them. They would have done this in person if everybody was working, in an office, but it becomes even more important because their plan is to have people working remotely, right? So promoting that work-life balance, and they found a way to do it. They felt that a mentoring program, everybody has a mentor that they meet with, and they can use as a sounding board. That's a big part of what they want to do. Regarding work remotely, again, this is last fall. They decided that their virtualization effort involved having an official work remotely policy that gives the staff the flexibility to do it, to work remotely, and it includes all of the remote working technology and IT support necessary to ensure that remote working employees can be successful. So it's one thing to sort of allow some people to work remotely, but they have to sort of ask permission, and maybe it's not done equitably. It's not available to everybody. Let's say they decided they needed to have an official work remotely policy that gives all members of the staff the flexibility to do it, and that they're going to be supported to do it well. They also wanted to include in this project strategies to guide the firm's approach to staffing challenges, right? So, they're thinking about those kinds of things. They're thinking about, like you said, incorporating remote working. They're thinking about firm culture and training. That's all related to these HR and staff engagement type issues that we were talking about. And of course, they want staff to be empowered. They want them to feel empowered. They want them to contribute their ideas about evolution, and they want to start to train them from the very beginning to think of themselves as becoming trusted advisors to clients. Right now, that's not normally something I think that's that common for a new hire just out of school, but they want to start them off on that right away. And then finally, they put real thought into how technology helps drive a positive experience. Thinking about how can they position these technological changes to staff? How can they position it so that it makes it a positive experience? Get the staff to talk about the positive ramifications of virtualizing, and I think they were surprised that I think they're hoping that they're going to find some where they're saying something actually, that technological change, that move from a manual to a more technical process actually had these positive outcomes. So they really approached it that way. It was just a really interesting conversation with a very frank and kind of open book audit team, talking about the things they were trying to do. And again, they told us about it last fall. So as good as that fall before discussion, which we'll make available to you, that discussion about their plans to virtualize, the after discussion made it better. So we got to talk to them again, and here is Jason Miller, again, from Anglin, on what's up right now.
We also do peer reviews for other firms and monitoring services for them. And then here lately, we've had the fun time of implementing Knowledge Coach while transitioning to full remote working, assisting clients with triple P loans and other SBA loans, all while trying to survive the COVID-19 pandemic. So it's definitely been a busy 2 or 3 months.
Interesting. So here's another clip from the very timely Followup interview, which was a LinkedIn Live called Revisiting Staffing and Cultural Challenges in Attest Services. And this chat happened less than 2 weeks ago, right? So Jason was asked about the status of that implementation project, which turned out to be that they were implementing Knowledge Coach, which is a cloud-based audit product from Wolters Kluwer. That's the one that they chose during that process. And ultimately, they decided they had planned to do the implementation of that. Now, interestingly, the much of the implementation work for this had been scheduled for March and April. So let's get his response to that question.
As Meg and I said, we felt that overall it's been fairly seamless for us in our specific circumstances.
That is remarkable. They had already started doing remote working and remote audits by choice, right? So this started last year. So for them, not much had changed there when the pandemic hit them and their clients. It's really kind of amazing to hear them say, so how much did the pandemic impact you? And them saying, well, not much. We had already adopted a remote working policy. We had already started doing remote audits. So, when we had to sort of adapt for the pandemic, when everyone did, we were pretty much already there. and we were ready to help out our clients because we had already virtualized. So they also they mentioned that that their employee engagement and work-life balance mentoring that they had wanted to do, they did that, and it became 100% via a Microsoft Teams type interactions, okay, with the cameras on, of course. They said to make that real, right? You've got to have the cameras on. You have to be engaged, and then they just moved all of their physical events and socialization events. They just moved all those to Microsoft Teams and got creative about it. Okay, so let's go back to the audit partner, Jason Miller, again, on their choice to go through with the software implementation during the pandemic, right? So they had this thing scheduled, and then the pandemic hit. So let's hear him talk about the decision they made to go through with that implementation during the pandemic, and also talk a little bit about their culture and their mindset on disruption and on change.
Really, with the software implementation and stuff, I guess first it kind of goes back to our overall culture. One, unlike the traditional thought of maybe some accountants, we don't like to stay the same. Change is what we strive for. Disruption, is actually probably encouraged, because if we're not disrupting and changing, we're not improving. And if we're not improving, we're falling behind. So that kind of sets out kind of the tone at the top.
And, and he went on to talk about also about how a little bit of success for Meg, who's on his team, and her counterpart, how a little bit of success for them implementing technology earlier in the process had really changed their mindsets to where they just embrace new technology implementations now, and he chose to put them in charge of, he really chose to put them in charge of some of the next virtualization type projects because he knew that they would be fully on board and they would take ownership of them. So why else have they thrived as they virtualized and dealt with a pandemic? Okay, well, now we'll hear from Meg. That's Meg Hampton. She's the Audit Supervisor there. And we'll give her the last word from Anglin Reichmann Armstrong CPAs and Business Advisors.
I think the key is communicate. We're not in the office where I can just run over next door to Leanne's office and check with her on something, or run into somebody else when I'm going to the kitchen and say, oh, hey, I meant to talk to you about such and such. So the communication, that has all changed, but the level of importance of it has not changed.
Look, that is good advice from Meg. I think that was a great before and after case study on virtualizing your A&A practice. And we'll make those two full interviews available for your listeners. I think that you might really get some value out of that, because they went in kind of full bore on here with a really aggressive agenda of trying to do two things they felt were really important, and they gave very honest ideas on here's what we're going to try to do, and then here's what happened. So definitely check those out.
And nothing beats hearing it from the people who are doing it out there in the real world, does it? Actually, to be completely accurate, they're using the virtual world to keep things going in the real one, aren't they? But the more those two worlds blur together these days, I think the more interesting this whole space, this whole dynamic between the two seems to be. And with the right planning, they can work together really well. Just as we've heard from you, what we learn from other people's experiences can help inform what we may choose to do in our businesses. We create our own paths to virtualizing our practice or our organizations. And of course, everyone's experience, some may be more relevant, some less, but all of it feeds into what we may be doing in future. And I think that's a good excuse for us to look at where we may be going next. Steve, time to get out that crystal ball. I'm going to ask you to look ahead of the curve, look toward the next disruption. What do you think is the next big change for us? What's the next big disruption that lies ahead, perhaps for a practice as it goes virtual? How did the finance professionals in that situation prepare for it?
If you're gonna force me to look into the future and stuff you can't do today, I can do that. And it's interesting how this would change. Like what I would have said 2 years ago versus this year are probably very different. With blockchain-powered cryptocurrency adoption already underway, and machine learning-powered first-generation, artificial intelligence, if you want to call it that, already answering calls and chatting. What I would say is that dynamic audit is the next disruption for our industry, for this industry. Our president at CPA.com, our president and CEO, Eric Asgerson, he said it best when he states that we're at an inflection point in the financial statement audit. Emerging technologies allow us to reimagine how we perform the audit, what we look at, when we look at it, and how we look at it, and do that to provide greater insights and value to the client. Okay, so think about data-driven, technology-enabled audit solution. Think about that type of an audit solution that will enhance the efficiency, quality, and value of audits. Right? It's really an exciting development for A&A firms, as auditors will be able to bring so much more to their role as a trusted advisor for clients, because the technology will be able to do a number of things that they had to do manually. It really is an exciting thing. Now, while the very largest firms have been and are developing their own dynamic audit tools, right? The AICPA and CPA.com are driving the development of a dynamic audit solution for firms of all sizes. And the first commercial release of that is expected in 2021, right? So that's coming up. So this is some pretty big disruption, and it's coming soon. There's going to be a minimally viable product, an MVP, which is likely going to happen later this year in 2020, and then the first commercially available release is expected in 2021. So I'm giving up a little bit of a secret there that not everybody knows about. And if you want to get a taste of what's coming, if you want to, how do you prepare for this dynamic audit solution? One thing that professionals can do is check out a product called OnPoint PCR. Okay, that's a CPA.com product. It's developed in conjunction with Caseware. And it is a preparation, compilation, and review tool. And it represents the first major step in the journey toward auditing in the future. I mean, it is essentially a sub-element of the dynamic audit solution. It basically integrates AICPA guidance into the Caseware cloud platform, and it incorporates some of the basic elements that will be found in the dynamic audit solution. So it is very much a part of the dynamic audit solution development process. Rivio Clearinghouse, which is a product that I own at CPA.com, that's the electronic CPA report delivery, tracking, and management platform. That will also be integrated into the dynamic audit solution. So, Rivio is another way to kind of get a taste of what the future is going to be for dynamic audit. And I'll just let you know that Rivio is available today for audit firms that are looking to virtualize. And right now there's a special no-cost offer in place to provide the Rivio's professional electronic CPA report delivery and management. Provide that through September 30th at no cost for firms that sign up by June 30th. So that's an offer that's out there if people want to try that.
Thanks. And of course, all that is a 2020 date. So if you're listening to this episode from our archive in 2021 or sometime beyond, of course, those dates only applied that year. But the good news is new things happen all the time, and we're glad that as they happen, this podcast is certainly one of the places to hear all about them, wherever and whenever you happen to be downloading and listening to the episode. Steve, before we wrap up, let's ask you to do some more heavy lifting. Let's ask you to do some signposting. For anyone who'd like to find out more about this topic, about virtualizing your practice, perhaps more about you and your work, what are some resources you'd recommend that would help them do that right now?
Okay, so number one is the website called A Distributed, More Virtual CPA Firm and A&A Practice. Okay, so that's a site that I worked on with the CPA.com A&A team. And we curated resources specifically to help audit and assurance firms quickly adapt to the current business landscape and transition their firm and their A&A practice to a remote working environment. You know, we curated and developed resources around some key areas where we feel we can most help firms, help transform firms, I should say, and this practice area. So this site includes that excellent Lisa Bodell Simplifying to Innovate keynote presentation that I mentioned, and again that was from the most recent December digital CPA event, and that's really a great resource for any firm, any finance company, or any other organization that wants to simplify, innovate, and grow. So that's on that site. That same site, which will be the first link that's available in the show notes here, also includes another session from the digital CPA event called Upskilling in Flight, right? So we talked about that concept in that one. So her session from the event is also available there on that page at the first link. Okay, the remote working audit firm discussion, we had played a clip from that with 3 key points from Kim Moore. So her session is on there as well. It's not really a session. It's actually a recorded 20-minute LinkedIn Live that we just did with her. So that's there, and she shares her wisdom and practical advice for auditing firms that are trying to adjust to remote working conditions. You know, her firm moved to a distributed model themselves a few years ago. So their firm's pioneering experiment and what they learned along the way can really help today's firms that have to do it and do it quick. Other resources are, another DCPA is coming up. The Digital CPA 2020 event is coming up in December. So that's something to consider. So we'll put a link in there for that.
Steve, before you go, I ask all my guests to design their own virtual takeaway t-shirt for the Go Beyond Disruption podcast. So if you have to put a single message on the t-shirt, a takeaway that if you printed it on the front of that t-shirt, there'd be a phrase or a sentence that would kind of sum up everything just in a phrase. What would that t-shirt say? Okay.
Well, I think on the front of that shirt, it would say, embrace change and virtualize your people, place, and processes. And then I think on the back of the t-shirt, it would say, if not now, when?
They always say it's the right thing to do with your business cards, don't they? No matter which way you leave it facing, there's never a blank side being wasted. And you've just done the same with our t-shirt. So well done. Steve Menges there from CPA.com.
Goodbye.
We'll have links to everything Steve has talked about in the show notes. And of course, we'll have a link to his LinkedIn profile there too. That's it for this episode of the Go Beyond Disruption podcast. You'll find more at gobeyonddisruption.com, where you'll find all previous episodes, plus you'll get new ones every week, completely free, available wherever you already get your stream music or your podcasts. So you'll find us on iHeartRadio and Radio Public in the USA, as well as on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, even on YouTube. We're pretty much global at the moment. All sorts of places where we can bring you the insights that we have from inside the accounting and finance community that help you in your business, whatever you do and wherever you happen to be doing it. Thanks again for listening in. I'm Carl Hannon, and from the London office of AICPA and CIMA, until we talk again, keep listening, keep healthy. Goodbye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Beyond Disruption, brought to you by the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants. Learn more about today's topic at aicpa-cima.com/disruption. This podcast is designed to provide illustrative information with respect to the subject matter covered and does not represent an official opinion or position of the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants or any of its subsidiaries or affiliates. It is provided with the understanding that the association, its affiliates, and subsidiaries are not engaged in rendering legal, accounting, or other professional services. If such advice or expert assistance is required, the services of a competent professional person should be sought. The association, its subsidiaries, and affiliates make no representations, warranties, or guarantees as to and assume no responsibility for the content or application of the material contained herein, and expressly disclaim all liability for such damages arising out of the use of, reference to, or reliance on such material.